Luigi Mangione is now in New York after waiving extradition out of Pennsylvania. After two brief back-to-back hearings there, the focus of his case will now switch to the more serious charges out of New York, where he faces accusations of murder and terrorism in both state and federal charges. Mangione's case has captivated the nation for weeks, following the shocking murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, who was gunned down in broad daylight outside of a Midtown Manhattan hotel. The entire country watched as a nationwide manhunt then broke out for this accused assassin. Thompson was shot and killed on December 4th, and after that, Mangione was on the run for nearly a week until he was arrested at a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania. There, officers found him with $2,000 cash, a fake ID, a laptop, a notebook with what some are calling a manifesto, and a ghost gun made from a 3D printer. Since then, Mangione has been held at a prison in Pennsylvania on charges there, including forgery and possessing instruments of a crime. At a court hearing just last week, Mangione contested extradition to New York, his defense attorney publicly saying he'd seen no evidence to connect Mangione to Brian Thompson's murder. But there was a change of tune Thursday morning when Mangione waived extradition. This comes after a short preliminary hearing in PA discussing the forgery and firearms charges. After that, Mangione agreed to leave Pennsylvania and be extradited to New York in exchange for a 20-page report from the Altoona Police Department. Now, Mangione only briefly spoke during these court appearances, simply saying yes and no in response to a couple questions. He didn't speak to reporters outside either when he was being escorted from the courthouse after all these hearings. Following all this, the Blair County District Attorney Pete Weeks spoke to reporters outside the courthouse. He said, quote, "Because of the defendant's reversal today and decision to waive his preliminary hearing as well as his extradition, certainly we believe it's in the interests of justice to turn him over to the New York City Police Department and Manhattan District Attorney's Office, which we did. He is now in their custody. He will go forth with New York to await trial or prosecution for his homicide and related charges in New York. We intend to keep our case active, and we intend to essentially revisit the case when the defendant is available for prosecution in Blair County." There's something else I wanted to note too that we just have to mention in this case. It's the public support that Mangione has seen since his arrest. And this has been an ongoing dialogue for more than a week. It's not just water cooler talk or TikTok videos, but it's real life too. At today's hearing, upwards of 100 supporters lined the sidewalk to the Blair County Courthouse in Pennsylvania, all in support of Mangione. Some even had signs. They read things like "Free Luigi" or "Healthcare is a crime." Besides all the callousness of the crime itself, this outpour of support for an accused murderer is unusual to say the least. It's just something that needed to be noted. But back to today's timeline. Officials wasted no time on Mangione's extradition process after the hearings in Pennsylvania. Almost right away, he was put on a plane to New York, where he arrived early this afternoon. So here's where the federal charges come in. Mangione had already been charged in New York with first-degree murder, second-degree murder as a crime of terrorism, 2 counts of criminal possession of a weapon in the second degree, and a final count of criminal possession of a weapon in the third degree. Those are all state charges, but just today, federal charges were piled on top of those, including murder through use of a firearm, 2 stalking charges, and a firearms offense.
Okay, I know you're multitasking when you're watching our videos, and if you're out running errands, listen up. I have to tell you about the free app Upside that gets you cash back on daily essentials. I now use it every time I pump my gas because it's so easy and it's free, so why not? Here's what you do. Download the Upside app and claim an offer for whatever you're buying. Pay as usual and then follow the steps on the app to get paid. To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside, or scan the QR code on your screen and use our promo code LCNews to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Okay, a lot happening in New York in the Luigi Mangione case. That's actually where I am right now, and I'm joined by litigator Rich Schoenstein here to talk a bit about this case. Thank you so much for coming into our studios today.
My pleasure. Good to see you in person for a change.
I know, it's so fun, but we're talking about something super serious today, and we have some brand new charges that we're talking about, the federal ones, in the case of Luigi Mangione. Just from the top here, I know that we had talked about the New York charges that were the state charges, but now we have federal. What do you make of all of that?
Right. Well, I was just handed this hot off the presses as I came in the studio. There is a federal indictment now, a sealed complaint, well, unsealed complaint. There are 4 charges in federal court, 2 charges of stalking, a charge of murder, and a charge of firearms. The stalking is stalking with use, stalking in interstate commerce, stalking with use of interstate facilities, which I think is the hook to get this case in federal court.
So does all of that make sense to you? The fact, let's talk about the stalking one, because that one stood out to me right away. Does that one make sense to you based on what we know about the case?
Yes, it makes sense. The allegation here is defendant traveled in interstate commerce with the intent to kill, injure, harass, intimidate, and place under surveillance with intent to kill, injure, harass, and intimidate another person. And that seems consistent with the facts. He came into New York targeting this individual. He knew he was going to stalk that individual, find that individual, and shoot him. So that seems to be what's alleged.
How does all of this work, though? Because we have those state charges already. He was flown from Pennsylvania to New York just today. We can talk about extradition in a minute. But we already have those state charges. So what takes precedence here?
Right. Well, so actually, it's usually sort of decided by the prosecutors. The federal prosecutors and the state prosecutors, they're going to talk to each other. I mean, they're not each doing this in a vacuum. So the federal complaint, the thing that's different about a federal complaint from a state complaint is in the federal system, there's actually a possibility of a death penalty in the federal system,
that's a good
which
point.
isn't true under New York state law. The state law, New York state doesn't have the death penalty. And so life in prison without parole was the maximum penalty under the state charges. The other thing that's different is it might make a difference as to where he's going to be housed in detention, because instead of the state system where he presumably would have gone to Rikers Island, now he's in the federal system. I don't know if he'll go then to a federal jail. I'm not sure how that'll work out.
What jumped out to me right away is we've been talking a lot about jail federal cases because of P. Diddy. Obviously, that's a big case that we're talking about a lot. And I thought MDC, I wonder if he could potentially go there. I know that's kind of a side tangent, but is it possible that he could be in the same facility as P. Diddy?
Sure, that's possible. And by the way, I'm sure like Diddy, he'll try to get bail, but he's not going to get it. Diddy didn't get it. This guy's not going to get bail.
Oh, yeah. All right, so let's go back to extradition too, because he's been held in Pennsylvania for quite some time. He at first fought extradition. He said, no, we don't have any evidence to support this alleged murder incident in New York. That has nothing to do with Pennsylvania here. He fought it, and now today, change of tune, and all of a sudden he wants to go to New York. Why do you think they made that change?
Pointless to fight extradition. It was never going to work. He was going to get extradited to New York. Listen, he's got a very good New York defense lawyer now, former prosecutor, very experienced. And I suspect the advice he got was, we're not going to go into court and fight extradition and have to make statements about the charges, which is what he would have had to do. We should just consent, waive it, go to New York, plead not guilty.
So he's pleading not guilty about all of that. We haven't heard official pleas at all yet, but we can just assume based on Karen Agnifilo, his defense attorney now, that they're going to put up a bit of a fight. And obviously we have to talk about this case too, the outpouring of support that this accused murderer has gotten. It's really strange, a lot different than the other cases I have seen. And it seems like he was doing this for a cause. So I'm wondering if he would be outspoken in court, if he maybe even would take the stand.
Well, I would be amazed to see this guy ever take the stand, especially with a good defense lawyer by his side. There's no upside. Listen, even if he wanted to get on the stand and said, I did this because the healthcare system in this country is terrible and a lot of people die and I wanted to send a message, that's not a defense. Like, that's not a defense to murdering somebody, shooting them in the back in cold blood. That's not self-defense. That's not justification. That's not a legal argument. So there's no way he's going to get on the stand, I think, and say that, and probably won't have much to say at all as we go through this case.
You're right. That's not a defense. That's a great point. But what do you think a good defense could be for him?
Well, his defense is reasonable doubt. I mean, it's a classic reasonable doubt case. You don't have a witness. You don't actually have me on film. You can't tell from the video of the shooting who it was. Now, the federal case, by the way, the federal case is more contains more factual allegations. The state case, the indictment, is just kind of matter of fact, here are the 11 causes of action, or the 11 charges, I should say. And in the federal complaint, we have the pictures come back, and we have a lot more information. And they say I think they said there are hundreds of pictures and images of the flight from the scene of the crime. So they're going to try to piece together intricately the story that pins this to him, and he's going to argue you can't prove it was me.
We've been talking a lot, here on Law&Crime, it's been the discussion on Twitter, on X rather, TikTok, all over. People are talking about the evidence. You just brought it up. Can't prove that it's him definitively. That's obviously going to be something he's going to touch on. But as you pointed out here, right in this indictment that we're talking about right now, there's a lot of information against him. What do you think about the state? They wouldn't have brought these charges without having enough that they feel that they could yield a conviction, right?
Sure, typically. Typically, the prosecutors, especially when you're talking about the federal prosecutors in the Southern District, they don't miss a lot. So they don't tend to bring a case unless they think they have enough evidence. From the reports, he was arrested in possession of evidence. They say here that they found the clothes he was wearing, they found the pistol that was used, they found the silencer. This is all stuff that was on him. Also, he has writings where he sets forth what is going to be argued to be the motive for all of this. There is a weight of evidence. There appears to be a weight of evidence, but, United States of America, innocent until proven guilty.
Moving forward, though, I want to go back to the state cases. I guess that's kind of moving backwards, but let's talk about that too, because you and I off cam were talking about the charge of terrorism. This is something that a lot of people are talking about too. What is your take on that? A lot of people have pretty hot takes on it.
Okay. Well, I don't know if mine's take is a hot take, but
we'll see.
But first of all, I understand why they charged it. So the New York State, intentional murder is only second-degree murder. That might not be intuitive, but intentional premeditated murder alone only gets you to second degree. Second-degree murder only gets you a sentence. The highest, I think, is 25 years to life with an opportunity for parole. To get a sentence of 25 years to life with no opportunity for parole, you have to go to first-degree murder. First-degree murder requires that it be an intentional killing and that it has an aggravating factor. Like, for example, if you kill a police officer, first degree. If you're already sentenced for a capital offense and you kill somebody, first degree. And one of the aggravating factors is terrorism. So the reason strategically to charge him for terrorism is to get this up to first-degree murder, which to me makes total sense. So that's why they did it.
I'm glad that you explained that, because a lot of people are talking about, they're bringing in January 6th and the incident that happened storming the Capitol. Those people didn't even receive terrorism charges. But to me, what you're saying, it sounds like it was a logistic choice by the prosecution, because we weren't sure at the time yet that we were going to get these federal charges, and they wanted to get him the largest sentence possible.
Right. You're right. It's not a terrorism crime. He's not being charged with terrorism. He's being charged with murder that was done as an act of terrorism. But the charge is murder. So it's different than the January 6th. You can say whatever you want about the January 6th people. I have a lot to say on that topic some other time.
Yeah.
But this guy, the charge is murder with terrorism. And I think the prosecution could prove it. He didn't do this because he had a personal grief with Brian Thompson. He didn't even know the guy, as far as we know. There was no interaction. There's no motive. It's not a crime of passion. It's not personal. He did it to send a message, right? Isn't that terrorism? Isn't an act of violence perpetrated to make a political statement or send a message? Isn't that exactly what terrorism is? I don't think it's overcharged.
And I mean, that's what the prosecutors in New York State are saying too. They agree with everything you're saying. But I wanted to go back to the federal charges too, because we've talked a lot about this. The state obviously wants the longest sentence possible. They believe that they've got their guy. But then the feds, as you brought up, he could potentially face the death penalty. We're still in the early stages of all of this right now. The indictment came down just today, this early afternoon. What do you expect is next?
Well, so he's got to enter pleas to all of these charges in both courts. He's going to request bail, I assume, and there'll be some discussion of that, and it will be denied, I assume. He's going to be imprisoned somewhere. I don't know where that is yet. And then both of the cases move forward. Now, his lawyer has, she's suggested an argument that he's being overcharged and that it's double jeopardy to have him under charge for the same crime in two different courts. That to me is not double jeopardy. If he was found innocent in one court, it might be double jeopardy to proceed in the other court on similar charges. That could be double jeopardy. But just having charges, multiple charges from the same crime in different courts, that happens all the time.
I know that you said the prosecutors, the federal and state, are going to communicate. Obviously, they're sharing a lot of evidence based on the crime itself, the alleged crime, let's say. But what do you think about testimony, for instance? If something happened, someone testified and it was amazing testimony in the federal case, and then the state case comes later, could they use this same testimony? How does that part work?
I mean, I think typically you would prefer to have a live witness on. I'm trying to think if you would
Or evidence, I guess, let's say.
Well, sure, you would use the same evidence in both cases, but it's hard to imagine a scenario where this goes to trial in one court and then goes to a separate trial in another court. I mean, that's playing this out over the long term. I'm not sure I really see it going down that way.
We've also speculated, too, that he would plead not guilty. Do you think there's any chance of a plea deal in this case?
There's always a chance of a plea deal in a case like this, especially when things like the death penalty or life imprisonment without chance of parole, when punishment like that is on the table. Those are little things that could be used to negotiate. Now, question, would a state prosecutor be willing to agree to an opportunity for parole down the road if he was to plead guilty? That's a question I cannot answer. That comes down to what the prosecutor's office would decide.
Okay, something we touched on earlier that I want to make sure to talk about, because this is, I mean, I was at a holiday party last night. This is what everyone is talking about. My friends are texting me about it. It's all over. The public outcry of support for Luigi Mangione. What do you make of all of that? It's unlike anything I've personally seen.
So two things about it. One, I too find it kind of shocking. I mean, allegedly he shot a father and a husband in the back on the street in the early morning. And that anybody would consider that an act of heroism, I don't understand it. So that's one. But I am going to say, I was thinking about this, and this happens all the time. I mean, when you think about it, in this country, we sometimes take people who have committed horrible crimes and sort of treat them heroically. You know, Bonnie and Clyde had a following back in the day.
Yeah.
The Menendez brothers, Ted Bundy, Alec Murdaugh gets love letters in jail, right? So that's been happening, you know, through the ages. What's different now is it's amplified on social media. Like Bonnie and Clyde did not have a GoFundMe page.
Good point.
Right? So now we see it and we can see the sheer numbers, and as you know, any voice on social media is much louder than a voice on the street. So I don't imagine those people who support him are anything close to the majority. I think they're a small minority of people. I think they're vocal. I think in some cases they're trying to get clicks. I think there are people with legitimate issues about the healthcare industry, but you can say, I find the healthcare industry to be really troubling. And at the same time, you're not allowed to shoot a guy in the back and kill him under any circumstances. Those two thoughts are completely consistent.
Another question going off all of this too, you said it seems like the voices on social media, those are the loud ones, the ones we're hearing, because we're seeing that when we're scrolling through our feeds and things like that. How does that affect jury selection for either of these?
So juries are different. Something that plays really well on X, as they now call it, doesn't necessarily play well in front of a jury, right? A jury is isolated, even if they've heard about the case. Some of them aren't even on social media. They're not supposed to be on social media during the trial. They get the instructions of the court. Let me tell you something. Jurors in New York, state and federal court, and I've tried cases in state and federal court in New York in the past year, they're great. They take jury duty really seriously. They take the judge's instructions really seriously. They work hard. I mean, think about the Daniel Penny trial we just saw. Those jurors considered the evidence for 4 days before they reached a verdict. They work really hard, and I don't think that they're going to be overly influenced by social media. They're going to have their own views of the evidence.
There are so many questions in this case that we still have that are unanswered. We're still in the early stages. Obviously, one we're going to continue to follow. Rich Owenstein, thank you so much for coming in today and breaking this brand new indictment down for us.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
That's where we're at right now at the time of this recording, but check back in for more updates on the Mangione case that are sure to unfold over the coming days and weeks. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.